Welcome to Saltwater Reasonings. This episode sits with research not as a technique, but as relationship, not as extraction, but as responsibility. My guest, Shakeisha Wilson Scott, invites us to slow down and ask what it truly means to work with people's stories. Across our conversation, we return again and again to affirming methodologies, not as a checklist or framework to be applied, but as an ethical posture shaped by humility, care, and accountability. Shakeisha reflects on moments where language had to be interrupted, where power needed to be refused, and where presence mattered more than productivity. She speaks honestly about the labor involved in ethical research, not only the intellectual and administrative work we are trained for, but the emotional and spiritual labor that follows long after ethics approval is granted. This is a conversation about dignity, about recognizing who is truly at the helm of change, about the difference between citation and recognition, and what it means to honor knowledge in spaces where it lives, not only where it's published. If you are interested in research, social work, community practice, or any form of work that asks you to sit with people rather than speak over them, this episode offers an invitation not to master a method, but to reconsider how you show up. I'm delighted to have this conversation first to talk about research and justice and affirming methodologies. I want to start by inviting you to share a moment that grounds you in a sense of how important justice is in research.
I'm going to reflect on really what moved me into where I sit now as a part of affirming methodology. I've gone through all the traditional stuff. I remember when I started my doctoral program and I was a true positivist at heart. But when I moved into my research, I looked at HIV positive men in Jamaica. And I struggled to find a research approach that could truly represent the experiences of these men. And you, against the context, I was going to say, you know the context, but for the purposes of what we're doing, of Caribbean masculinity, living with an illness that is so stigmatized, that shapes identity, that shapes everything, health outcomes, health access. And I literally went through about 5 approaches, 5 methodologies. In the end, the pressure was you just need to be finished.
Yeah.
And I moved with a methodology that came close to doing just that, being authentic about representing the men's experiences, but also moving it from that space to another for transformation, for not necessarily justice, but really to equip them, to empower them to create change within their own lives. But that struggle really sparked the need for something that was true to me, true to us as a people, true to the region, true to men, true to women. And that started that journey of exploration, which wasn't new. It is never to claim that, oh, I discovered this. No, it always existed. And we just never tapped into it. So yeah, it was literally just being true to the persons that I was serving. The topic literally came from the people, and I had to honor them in terms of the work that I was gonna do.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because I was going to follow it up by asking who you are and how do you come to this work, and I feel you've touched on that. And this idea of honoring dignity in research, and I think it's disingenuous of us to not acknowledge that research traditionally has not always been about honoring dignity of
Yeah.
quote unquote subjects who then
Yeah.
became participants, who now become co-researchers. There has been this transition. I want to invite you to talk about identity. How has that connected you to the importance of honoring dignity in research?
I'm gonna start with who I am, and it's something that I do with students at times. Who am I? How do we identify? And it's really important because the lens that I used for that study was intersectionality. And that was eye-opening for me as well. So I am woman, I am Black woman, I am mother, I am activist, I am advocate.
You
And
are
it's
Jamaican,
I
as you're
am
always
Jamaican.
reminding me of.
I am Jamaican. And by the way, that was a
Yes.
big thing because going into that space, people knew who I was because everybody thought of me the Jamaican and what that meant. And I had to go in and kind of break down some of those preconceptions, those misconceptions of
Mhm.
Jamaicans and who we are. You know, we have a reputation,
A good one.
a good one, and a strong one sometimes, right?
Yes.
So I have always been someone interested in fairness, in respect. That's how we were raised, respecting others, but also just seeing the injustice around and standing up. So no matter how small, it was not always well received. It's still not well received by everybody, but it's very difficult to see something that's happening that's harming someone, whether significantly or insignificantly, doesn't matter, that can cause injustice, that can hamper their own progress, their own journey, and not try to make a difference. And so that spurred me into that space of really working with vulnerable groups, vulnerable populations. I refer to my work with persons living with HIV and AIDS, but really more so as well persons with disabilities.
Yeah.
And just trying to champion I can't champion the cause, but really trying to join that movement for change at the end of
Yeah.
the day. Yeah.
Talk about why it was important for you to interrupt
Mhm.
yourself when you said champion the cause, to join the cause.
I find that the word champion suggests that I'm at the helm. And I don't see myself at the helm. I think that would be just wrong. The people are at the helm.
Yeah.
I just work with them. It's their process, it's their journey, whichever group it is, and I have to respect that. It's literally regarding the fact that they do have what it takes to transform their lives with the support of others. And so they are championing their own cause with the support of others like myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm hearing that, you said you came into the world, you were
Yeah.
oriented as a human being with a sense of fairness and justice.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting for me to sometimes think about the work that we eventually come to, but how that work is not really a discovery, but a reconnection to our purpose or clearer connection to our purpose, whether we see it or not.
Yeah.
So how you approach research is connected to how you are as a human being. I think it's not an accident that this is your orientation coming into research. I want to talk a little bit about the tensions that might exist, though,
Mhm.
between honoring a participant's truths and working within the confines that is research, that is an institution. What gets in the way of honoring participants' truths?
Everything. That wasn't the
Everything.
response you expected. I
I,
know,
it is everything.
but
Let's unpack that.
everything gets in the way. You are treating with systems at which we are at the center. You are treating with individuals, you're treating with culture, you're treating with personality, you're treating with agencies. And by agencies, I'm referring to those systems of power that are so deeply entrenched that it seems as though there is no opportunity for change. What's that? Change? Change who? Again, that's also couched in power. It's so multifaceted. I look at it and it really spans the person, the participant, the researcher, the space, and all the other factors that come into it. Where you want me to start? Let's
With
start.
everything, you can start
uh,
anywhere.
So In terms of research and doing research that values, that affirms, that builds up, requires a change in this notion of one word expert. Who is the expert? Who is the holder of the knowledge? And I know when you started, you looked at how research has evolved, the methodologies. Now we know participatory, we talk about giving back, centering the participants and so on. But are the participants truly centered? Is it really valuing their knowledge? Is it valuing where they are? Are we really using the tools that they use, that they have known for all their lives, etc.? Are we really sitting with them literally where they are? Are we just trying to do this just to get the job done and say that this is what we are and so on? Are we really able to shed our preconceived notions of what ought to be and what is factual, or this should be the best way, this can lead to this outcome? And who are we to decide that this outcome is actually even best for those who we are trying to center? How much conversation did we have with these persons from the get-go? And I think a lot of that for me really surrounds the researcher. I know I said I start with the participant, but it's even difficult to really pull aside one element. Can we separate the researcher from the participant, from the system, from the environment, from the space? And perhaps not, because then we start to treat with things in that unitary focus when it's hard, because doing that, our lens become blurred.
Yeah.
Because again, at the backdrop of that, let's say, for example, persons with disabilities. The experiences of persons with disabilities have been shaped by those around them. It's shaped by the space. So when I begin to address myself as a researcher and think that, all right, if I am trying to go about this and be neutral, nonsense. Because it's something has already been shaped. There is a history that must be acknowledged, and we cannot operate outside of that. That might sound confusing, but that's the beauty of it, that you work through that confusion to see the outcome, and you don't do it as researchers, as intellectuals, as academics. We don't do it independently. We do it with those we are working with. I don't know if that really answers, but it might move us into another space.
But I feel that it does answer it. I mean, when you started and you said everything, but then you started to break down everything. And one of the things that just shook me is the fact is before I even start to do this work, there are things that are already in the way of honoring the participants' truth. Who I am, my mindset, my cultural values, societal values in terms of how they define and position our population. So long before that initial contact, long before you
Yeah.
write a proposal,
Yeah.
there are things getting in the way. And I think in while you were speaking to, I was also hearing some pragmatic things that we can do, right? So a lot of them for us, having a reflexive practice is really important. So I
Right.
start to think about my biases and what are the things that are getting in the way.
Yeah.
And then I feel as though we can't escape advocacy in research when we want to
Hmm.
do research in a particular way,
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
because we are advocating to be able to speak the participants' truth unfettered.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. All of those things. So if I'm to step back, to step forward, and to pull on some of the things that you've already mentioned, Tracy. So reflecting on who we are is so important. The traditional approach is to approach research without bias, to nullify. We go in very stoic, without feelings, without emotions. And that does more harm than good. So often, our participants tap into us, not just for the ears that we bring to listen to their stories, but especially in those instances where the journey can lead to healing, they tap into us for that healing as well. When we go in numb, robotic, and so on, we do more harm than good. So it's important for us to be true to ourselves. And it's so funny that so many of us are perhaps not comfortable with who we are, or perhaps haven't spent enough time unveiling that. And then there are those who might really have a strong sense of self, But then that strong self of self just kind of rolls over everybody else if you come in my way. And so we have to be mindful of how we position self in these spaces. So reflexivity is such a big word. It's so important from the space of the researcher that we talk about it, that we embrace it, that we practice it, but that we also allow ourselves to be vulnerable with our participants as well, because as we reflect, we can reflect with them and they help us to see the world as how they see it a lot better, to say, hey, well, not quite like that. And that helps to transform their space because it changes how we perceive their space. It's a beautiful thing. Another barrier I want to mention, perhaps diving into the deep end here, is the whole thing of ethical practice. Ethics is a big thing for us. It's intended to ensure that the rights and dignity of our participants are regarded, but the process sometimes can be so much of a deterrent that I don't think we're true to what we put on paper sometimes, just to move past it. But moving from the formality of ethical applications and approval, there's the ethics of practice that centers, you refer to rights, you refer to dignity, everything, the practice that ethically must be regarded, and that must emanate from every single aspect of that which we do. The words, the language, the body language, how we represent ourselves, the expressions that we share, how we actually integrate and participate. It's kind of interesting, and that's really doing that justice for these groups, for these persons.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking about how much labor is involved in doing research, right? And doing ethical research, but also doing ethical research that honors both the rights and protections of the participant, and negotiating the institution that also is about protecting itself as well. And so I think about um, just the different types of labor.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the cognitive labor and the intellectual labor of figuring it out. There's the administrative labor, but there's also the emotional labor of the work. I think there's also spiritual labor involved as well.
Yeah.
I just want us to kind of reflect on the labor that's involved in doing this and how do we balance it well?
Can we really balance it though, Tracy? It depends on where we sit. So you and I are lecturers, and we know what it is. We know for our students, it's not the balance, because it really comes back to power. And I guess the pushback. How many times can we push back? They have an end date in mind. But the balance as we move up or into those spaces where we have greater autonomy over what we do, we can push more for that. And a key part of that balance is the passion. The passion for what you do. If you don't have it, you're just not gonna follow it through to the end, because it can wear you down. These
It
systems
can.
can wear you to the ground. You get up, you brush up, you say, let's go again. That takes passion to do that every single
Yeah.
time. And it's really a part of that passion is the desire to honor, to work with, to regard, to shed light, to respect, to to transform with these persons, to do that type of positive building growth process that keeps us navigating that space. And what I do appreciate is that we have seen a widening and a greater willingness to accept these approaches, because we've always spoken about, I mean, ethics at the very core will say, oh, but it has always been about dignity, respecting the dignity and so on of these persons. That's what we do. That's why you have an consent form, because that's why you know, voluntary. That's why you put this in place. That's why you don't say you pay persons to participate. but we're still missing it. And we're still missing it because we never asked how. And over time and across spaces, the how has led to so many different things that I've taken some of those lessons with me in terms of indigenous approaches that center the practices, the ways of the people who we are trying to with. So it's more than just consent. I can't go to some people with a form and say, sign the form.
It's an overseer. I'm coming in, I'm
You
saying,
overstay approach. And when people see that, they say, but you're asking me to sign away my rights. I have invited you into my space. Where you going with that? You know, and we miss it if we hold on to some of these things. So we really have to be at that space where you can be humbled enough to sit at the feet of these persons and just bask in their presence and share in their knowledge because you have been invited into that space.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I guess to me, that's a dimension of spiritual labor as well.
Yeah.
Like there's an emotional and a spiritual labor around holding participant stories. So long after you get ethics approval, you're the one that shows up to sit with your participant. Yeah. Not the ethics people, not the institution. It's you. You sit there. And how do I ensure that I have the culture of humility to be in the space? And those are things that we're not taught.
No.
There is no course that covers that, except
No.
probably just the term, but like, how do we operationalize cultural humility? What does cultural humility mean when we are in somebody's yard? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And so the thing about affirming methodologies, and I want you to speak a little bit more about how you came into affirming methodologies. You mentioned being a Jamaican, so set the context about on how you would be a Jamaican.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was part of really breaking down what it is to have an affirming methodological
Yeah.
approach to research and speak to what that means.
Yeah. So I'd love to see you define cultural humility, by the way, and put it forward academically. I can see the patriarchal system looking down their nose at us and saying, where's she going with that? But we have to, right? No affirming methodologies. That's not the term we started with. So I am in New Zealand. I'm studying and I am grappling. My supervisors are trying their best, but they don't understand fully my background, who I am, and being true to this. I did phenomenology, did grounded theory. I entered the field, by the way, doing grounded theory. And I remember the turning point, and permit me to digress a little, because I think it's important. I sat with Emil. It was the most emotional interview that I've ever done. And because his life was so multifaceted and everything was just falling apart, I saw it. I recognized that he was not living with HIV. He was living with AIDS. I looked at his desire for love. Everything came and it came full force at me as a researcher. And I was overwhelmed and I paused because he had to pause to do something. He's homeless. He's living in an abandoned house with a group of other men and a lot of things were happening. And I paused and I said, I think we have to pause the interview because I couldn't be numb. I couldn't sit there and pretend as though I wasn't impacted by his story. I couldn't be, and it wasn't a story per se. This is his life, his experience. And he needed to be attended to otherwise. So I had to pause. I realized grounded theory was just not doing it. Grounded theory was about coming up with a theory of there's something about that. And I was like, I said to my supervisor after that, I can't use this. And she said, oh, just take a little while and think about it. And then you're writing gerunds and all of that. And I thought, no, it doesn't apply. This is not being true to the experiences of these men. So my sounding board, Trinity to the bone, but her Trinity nationality never impacted. It was so lovely having another Caribbean person in the space who understood what I was talking about, what it meant to be a Caribbean male or a Jamaican male, being unwell and all of these things. And her extended support, which kind of, when you look at it culturally, we have a village. We always have a village when we're growing up and so on. So it's not just those who are in your home, you have those around who offer that support. So she became the neighbor or whoever it is, the extended relative, to offer that support and help to take me through that process, which was fantastic. The person I'm referring to here, Trinity to the Boat, is Professor Camille Nakid. She is within cultural studies. She was in another department external to my own, and I didn't know that she was at that university before I joined. So that was just awesome that she was there as that sense of support. It was also important in her role to help to validate. So it comes back now to that position of pushing back. So it was great having a professor from the region who could add value to my arguments. Through it all, we discussed this thing that we need something that's true to us as a region. I'd say to her, Camille, we need something that's true to us as Caribbean people. We're pulling on things that are really not resonating with us fully. It feels as though we are being forced to fit in to a construct, to a framework that's really denying us our true sense of self, ultimately. And she agreed, and we started to have conversations about it. And this is how it really started. It was literally liming. We've started to have limes, and then she said, "Oh, I was having this conversation with somebody. Somebody's interested to come over from Cuba, and that's Annabelle. That's how Annabelle joined." And then she said, I remember even before Annabelle, she said to me, "Do you mind if I pull my sister into this conversation?" Because we were having this talk, and she's also in academia. She's there in Trinidad, and that's how we started to expand the network. And then we said, you know what? I think we should push for this. This was towards the end of my doctoral journey. And I needed to come out, I needed to be done. So this wasn't trying to go back around and say, all right, let me change my approach, but it was still holding steadfast to it, not just for me, but for really everyone within the region who needed to have something else outside of these things that we were told that we should use. These are the tools that we should use. This is how we should, but they're misfits. And I think if we're true and honest with ourselves, you feel it. You know that as you're using this thing, it's not quite working the way I want it to work. Each time I do, and I still use Western approaches, right? People still want it when I do work external to my personal research. But I see it when I do a focus group discussion. So I look at the faces of the people and I feel like I am losing the core of the mission because they're there. I'm at the front. There is a hierarchy automatically. I am not sitting with the people. I am standing. I am centered. And not me supposed to be centered. It's their stories. It's their experiences. But by just doing that, I've altered the process. I've literally just started to create that I'm going to use their own word, the bias. I'm already biasing the outcome. So that started that journey for us in terms of really working as a group, as a collective, working towards Caribbean research methodologies, and later moving into affirming methodologies. And I know that's the question you asked.
Yeah.
So affirming methodologies, the early conversation was about really distinguishing the work from Western traditional approaches. That sat squarely within decolonial methodologies, but that's not what we were doing. We were literally looking at that which existed, has always existed, and pulling on it. For me, as an individual, I recall the work of Barry Chevans, who was Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences, and at that point he was a mentor. He supervised my research paper as an undergrad student. I think of Erna Bradva and her work as well. And these are persons, though in some ways it wasn't formalized in their approach to research, always spoke about being centered within the people. So you're there. So for example, I remember Prof. Chevans talking about just going into the community and standing on the corner and liming with the guys. That's the first time I heard the word liming. And you know them there, and no matter what they're doing, you football, you play football, you lime and so on. There wasn't a shift from their space. It was being with them where they are. And I thought, that's it. That's what we're missing. So it was really an attempt to formalize and affirm, value the approaches of the people. We have already been doing some of these things. Liming is something, as an example, that we have always been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we realized that to be true to the work, affirming methodologies, and by saying affirming methodologies, we were distinguishing the work from decolonial approaches, where there was always this comparison against, at the backdrop, there is always Western methodologies. Nah, we don't need to compare ourselves to anybody else. No, we're good. We are good all by ourselves.
You said you went off course, but I don't think you went off course at all. And that moment that you shared that you had to pause the interview, and it feels like in that moment you had to choose between the participant's truth and you received success, quote unquote success. I
Yeah.
mean, a successful interview is getting through all or most of the questions using the appropriate
Yes.
and getting to the end. That's a successful interview. And you chose the participant's truth over
Yes.
that interview. And that feels as though it was this moment that if you had to honor your sense, the data that your body was receiving,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
to honor that data,
Yeah.
you had to interrupt it.
Yes. I love it. Yes.
Yeah. What a powerful moment.
It
You know,
was.
I think it was the American Association of Psychology a few years ago had come out with this apology, issuing apology in terms of how psychology, they were speaking specifically to diversity and inclusion in psychology, how the research tradition and how amassing this research was done at the expense of people. And I'm talking about the APA now, but I mean, you find it right across anthropology, you find it there. I tell students all the time that the history of social work cannot be separated from imperialism. It just can't. Yeah,
Yeah.
if we want to talk about the establishment of this profession. So when we hear about apologies, and apologies are fine, there's an acknowledgement, but I often wonder, where is the repair and how does repair happen? And in that moment, when you spoke about interrupting the successful interview to honor the participant's truth, that feels like a moment of repair.
Mm-hmm.
It feels as though you're making a stance about not continuing in this tradition. And I wonder if you can share your thoughts around repair and what does it mean to engage in repair with participants. And I say this as someone who has done research with with populations who have extreme distrust for research. You know, I'm
Yes.
thinking about the work I've done around living with HIV, around sexual minority groups, and
Yes.
but a gay man telling me, I have nothing to say to you.
Yes.
Yeah, just, and I've actually been told this in an interview. Let me know what you need to hear so I could get my stipend. And that's not because they want to exploit the system, but because the system has exploited them for so long.
Wow. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I was in that research interaction with participants, with a participant in particular. And someone can easily say, see, that's why the stipend shouldn't be so
Yes.
polluted. But the reason why he's at that position is because we have not given anything to this
We have.
community. We constantly come and extract.
Yes.
And
Yep.
so we're actually creating the harm that we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a technique. And I understand where we have questions and we're guided by them, but things must be organic. It must be natural. It must be fluid. It must flow. And that's where authenticity, the genuineness of us as researchers come in. Are you really, really caring about this research topic, or are you just trying to make your name in that space that seems to be the way to go right now? Are you really owning? Are you really a part of it? Oftentimes people ask me in these spaces how I identify, simply because they're trying to see if there is a similarity. And I say to them, when I work with groups, it don't matter if you choose to label me, I'm all right with that, because I'm working with the people for the people.
Yeah.
So I have to be prepared to do that. There is no distinction because there's no hierarchy, there's no separation. I don't need to go in and appear as though I'm separate from them. I was asked recently, and it comes back to the questions that you have been asked. The person said to me, so what is in this for me, this research? And I smiled. This wasn't my research. I'm facilitating the research, and so the first thing is to say what the leaders of the research said. Well, this is what, and then I said, well, and I believe this is what I believe. I believe that there is this opportunity for you to benefit. This discussion that we are having can ignite your own thoughts and how you can improve, how you can transform. And I just had that conversation and I said, tell me, what other questions do you have for me? So it wasn't about getting the job done. It was literally shifting that space where the power is actually yours. I'm just here to learn from you. But in learning, in that sharing, in that dialogue, there is something that you could benefit as well if you allow yourself to see it. But it's not for me to tell you, it's for you to see it.
You can also have the moment where you don't want that benefit. Like you
And
just
the truth,
articulated that
right?
to me. I don't see that as a
Yeah,
benefit.
yeah, yeah. And I have to respect that.
Yeah.
So I had to pause and I say, well, what do you think? And then the person, serious man, he said, all right, let's go ahead. I was like, all right, thank you. But
Yeah.
during the conversation, he said, that gives me an idea. We should do. And I said, I just want to highlight for you, ta-da, there you go. So it's not about always, and I think this is how the traditional approach has been. We come in bearing things and offer it in exchange for knowledge. No, you don't always, it's not transactional. And it doesn't need to be transactional. It can't be in exchange of knowledge. If you're going in to honor the community by doing this, it's different, but it's not in exchange. So even if they say, no, we don't want to talk to you, you're going to leave with your gifts? No, you came in intending to honor. So
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah. You leave what you're
and
leaving.
you say, all right, thank you. You go out, you leave with your envelope. That's not how
Yeah.
we do it. And in fact, that conversation ended, and I like to use the term conversation. I don't like interviews, but that conversation ended with him saying, I would love if you could, we have something that's coming up, and we would love to, consider inviting you to help us. And that's it. That's where you are relationship building. So it's not just to serve the cause of this research target, but there is an ongoing relationship that can do far greater things than the recommendations that will be written up for this research. And that's the foresight that we need to have. So it is the tone, it is the approach, it is really changing that it's not transactional, it's relational. I think sometimes we try to, when we say repay, we tend to naturally think repay monetary, repay gift, but mostly monetary. Nah. A lot of these people are rich in what they need to be rich in, and it doesn't have to be monetary. When you look at community, when you look at family, when you look at that bond and what that yields, money can't buy that.
Oh, I love that moment that people are rich already in what they need to
Yeah.
be rich in. And just what an honor to be able to be in community with your co-participants.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Woo. I love it. I love it.
You have to.
And I feel like that is repaying accountability.
Yes.
And that's how we begin to make those differences. I want to continue and ask another question along the same line. And sometimes I think about, like, one of the ways that we think that we credit people in research is by citation. I often think about the tension between citation and recognition, and that when it comes to building a research culture and building a research culture that's based on affirming methodologies, we need to know the difference between citation and recognition.
Yep.
I guess I want to invite you to kind of reflect on what is the difference for you.
So for me, citation is citation. That's a formal document that we prepare and we submit to persons. The people who matter won't necessarily access and read.
That's it. The people who matter
The
would not
people who
necessarily.
matter won't necessarily access and read. Now, this is the recognition for me. In the spaces that I go into, I start by acknowledging the people who made this work. In the document, I try to do it because it's appropriate. Each
Mhm.
time I say it, people look at me strange, but I will say to persons, oh, well, I may indicate your name as an acknowledgement of your contribution. I say it's important to recognize. It's important to acknowledge your contribution because this is your knowledge. And I do get the funny looks because I don't think that is said very often.
Yeah.
But wherever I am, whatever I do, it is to regard, even if I don't name, because some persons prefer not to be named.
Mhm.
Some communities prefer not to be named, but I try to honor and acknowledge the voices, the words of those who made this outcome possible. Another aspect of honoring is also how their words are used and presented in whatever form that it is. So this thing that you would I know it's not always done, but some persons I know there's a preference to not do Creole, to translate because it's the more understood language. No. In fact, I sometimes go back to my participant and say, how you spell this? Because Pato seems to have a lot of variations in terms of how we spell it.
Yeah.
And I try to respect depending on, where. Funny story. I remember having somebody do transcription with me, and I said to her, you have to transcribe as you hear it. And she called me and she said, I'm sorry, I'm unable to do this. I was not taught to speak patois. I was raised to speak formal English, and you are asking me to write patois. And I just said at the end, okay, no problem. When you're finished, you delete the recording, Just make sure to cover my ground in terms of data protection. I'm not trying to force you to be who you're not. I have to be true to the people. You can't be listening to Pato. She said she struggles. She said, I am deeply bothered by it. I said, all right, I'm not.
Recognition showing
Yeah,
up that
that
way as well.
recognition is really not filtering, not diluting, being true, risking the offense, the potential offense of others. Again, that verbal recognition and acknowledgement in a way that truly honors the participant. And that's how we find out from them. How is that done? what's the space that they want to be spoken about and how. I remembered just having even the permission of someone to feature them in a particular way, and the powers that we came out, you can't use a photo, It wasn't a face. I said, but the person wants the photo here and is okay with it
Yeah.
because it's a part of seeing himself in the report,
Yeah.
physically seeing himself. And that's a big thing.
We need to start unpacking this more and more and more.
Yeah.
Different ways in which we can privilege recognition.
Yeah.
So, like when I do photo voice exhibitions, I often do a private viewing before the exhibition is open for participants so that they get to walk through the space. But you mentioned something risk just now, and there's a risk that goes with that because I could multi exhibition and they could walk through the space the night before and say,
Yes.
I don't want this here.
Yep.
But that's part of it, though. That's part of it. And I was doing research in residential homes with young adults. They were between 14 and 16, and I had all of their approval. But in addition to a consent form, I had an assent form. When those young people were clear about what assent meant,
Yes.
oh, so
Yeah.
I don't need to do this. I choose no. And to really honor that, sometimes just in accepting no, the answer change. Okay, yes, it's serious. Yes.
Yeah.
But sometimes it
Jamaican.
meant no.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it
Yeah.
meant no.
Yeah.
But that's part of the risk of really being part of an affirming practice, not just in rhetoric.
Yeah. It's a part of the lesson. Jamaica say you will and come again. And you will and come again because you learned along the way that I need to change my approach. And you can't go knocking on the same door, not because you're really trying to get the data, but because you realize, nah, this shouldn't have been the approach. And to literally just cultural humility. Say, all right, I realize this just didn't work.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's start again. Can we? Or, yeah. And that more often than not yields a better response.
And it also becomes new data.
And it becomes new data because now you know really what the approach should be. We're not following this traditional thing of a saint and that. No, it don't always work. It's not
No.
for everybody.
And you have to be really clear. Sometimes we love the label resistance. And I think resistance is failed colonization. So anytime you want to label it resistance, it is not resistance, it is data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And there's a lot to unpack from that as well. Like you said, it's data. People see it as, I'm sure if you actually say that in a particular space, people would look at you very strange because you're looking for the tangible data, which you don't have. But there is
No.
data because you understand the process. That's rich.
Yeah, they are given evidence. So like in that interaction with those young people, that's a lot of data
Yes.
about their feelings around powerlessness, about agency. It can also open other ideas as well. Me
Yeah.
recording even their visceral response to this and what that means
Yeah.
and what empowerment really looks like. All
Yeah.
of that becomes data.
Yep. Whether it's accepted is another story, but that's
It's
what
a
we're
whole
pushing
other
for.
story.
Yeah, that's what that's what we're pushing for. The boldness, irrespective of whether it's accepted or not.
Yeah,
And that's how we change the space. That's why affirming methodologies is now increasingly recognized. Yeah.
definitely. So thank you so much for this conversation, Shakisha. And as we start to close, I want to ask what feels sacred, what still feels sacred about participant stories and how you hold them as a researcher.
I feel like I need to say the word everything again, but I'm going to
Yeah.
tell you why everything. It's how the story is told. It's the space in which the story is told. It's the emotion behind it. It's the truth that is experienced and shared from the perspective of the participant. All of these things are sacred. What I've learned is that in treating the sacredness of the participant knowledge, not everything can be disclosed. And I've had to do that. I've had to look at knowledge shared and say, this is so sacred, it should not be shared, because people will misunderstand, misrepresent, and mistreat because of it. And that was risking. That was risking really interfering with the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, right? So we're talking about the whole truth. But from where I stood, it was a sacredness that would protect the dignity, protect the experience, the practice of these persons that the world wasn't ready for as yet. Yeah. And I did say it to the persons that when I wrote the report, there are some things that I omitted because I didn't think the world was ready for it. And it was just an acknowledgement, because it's almost resonating with, but we know that, but we shared it because there is a sense of trust that I can share my story in full with you, but I don't know how you're going to share it with others because of how others see it, how others treat with it.
And you let the participants know?
I did. Perhaps today things would be different in that as we become increasingly more accepting, whether on surface or in depth, I find that there is more and more that can be shared that won't result in a particular response. But yeah, but it was important to say that I feel like if I share this aspect of your story, it could become problematic.
Thank you so much, Shakeisha, for taking this time. I think there are a lot of powerful lessons to be garnered from your experience.
I hope so.
As we close, I keep returning to something Shakeisha said about humility, about being invited into people's spaces and understanding that presence itself carries responsibility. This conversation reminds us that ethical research does not end with well-written protocols. It continues in our body, our language, our silences, and our capacity to hold what we are entrusted with. It asks us to recognize the labor involved in doing this work well: emotional labor, spiritual labor, relational labor, and to acknowledge that balance is not equally available for everyone. Shakeisha challenges us to think carefully about what it means to affirm people's truths without claiming ownership over them, to support without centering ourselves, to recognize knowledge without turning it into property. This episode asks difficult questions about how research cultures are built, who they serve, and whose voices are honored along the way. I hope you leave this conversation with sharper ethical questions, with a deeper rooted respect for people whose knowledge makes our work possible, and with a renewed commitment to research as an act of relationship, care, and accountability. You can learn more about Shakeisha's work at tracierogers.com/saltwater reasonings. Thank you for listening. Take care.